Have you ever heard a doorbell ring at 4:17 in the morning, when you were absolutely certain you were completely alone? It wasn't an alarm. It wasn't someone passing in the hallway. It was the dry, precise, and impossible-to-ignore sound of a motel room doorbell. And in that moment, with my heart racing and the breath caught in my chest, I knew something was wrong. Very wrong. I was in Kansas, driving along a forgotten stretch of US 56, trying to escape a storm brewing on the horizon. The main route was closed because of an accident, and the GPS took me down a back road where the signs disappeared and the landscape seemed frozen in time. When I saw that faded neon sign, Sunvale Inn, I felt a relief that I now understand as naive. I was too tired to think and too cheap to refuse. The parking lot was empty. No other cars. No sound other than the rustle of the dry wind blowing through the trees across the highway. The reception area looked abandoned, but a note left on the counter read, "Room 3, key and door, pay later." It was that simple, without anyone in sight. And since I didn't want to sleep in the car, I accepted. But that night something happened. At 4:17 in the morning I woke with a start. It was as if my body knew before my mind that something was about to happen. And then came the sound. Ding dong. The bell in my room. It wasn't possible. I'd locked the door. I double-checked. There were no other guests. There was no one at the front desk. Even so, that sound echoed down the hallway like a warning, an absolutely out-of-place sound, as if time itself had stopped for it to happen. When I looked at the digital clock on the bedside table, I was even more startled. He wasn't just clocking 4:17. He froze at 4:17, and it stayed like that, for long minutes. Nothing moved. Not the tick of the air conditioning, not the sound of the outside world. Just me, my irregular breathing, and that number, fixed as a sentence. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever had that feeling that time has stopped just to show you that something is watching you? Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you, and perhaps change the way you view these forgotten motels on the map. That night, I made the mistake of opening the door, and that's where it all began. That night, I made the mistake of opening the door, and that's where it all began. There was no one there, just the empty hallway, lit by a flickering ceiling light that hummed constantly, as if it were tired of shining. The air outside seemed thicker, as if it had passed through something invisible when I turned the doorknob. But the strangest thing was the feeling that I had done this before, the position of my hand, the chill down my spine, even the smell of the hallway. Everything seemed repeated, like a memory you don't know where it comes from, but you know it's not yours. And when I got back to the room, the clock still read 4:17, still frozen, as if time was waiting for me. That's why I'm sharing this with you, because maybe you've experienced something similar, not necessarily in a motel, but in that feeling that time has paused, just to show you that something is out of place, that there's something watching, something insistent, knocking on the door of your consciousness. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far. Have you ever experienced a situation that seemed out of the ordinary, out of time or out of logic? I read everything, really. And every comment you leave here isn't just a response to me, it's an echo for anyone who's felt this way and thought they were alone. And if you felt goosebumps, curiosity, or simply want to know what comes next, then give this video a like. This shows me it's worth continuing to bring these stories. Every click of yours is a boost that keeps this channel alive and growing. Oh, and if you enjoy stories that go beyond reality, forgotten motels, unexplained encounters, presences that shouldn't be there, subscribe to the channel now. There's a lot coming. Heavy stuff. Something that only those who have felt this shiver will understand. Because the truth is that wasn't the last time the doorbell rang. The next night it rang again. And this time, it left something behind the door. My name is Ethan Coleman. I'm 32 years old, born in Fort Worth, Texas, and grew up hearing my father say that the road is more than just a path. It's a test of character. Maybe that's why I chose to drive rather than take a direct flight when I learned my sister was in the hospital, in serious condition. She lives in Aurora, Colorado. I was in Dallas, finishing a project that had already consumed me more than it should have. I got in the car, threw a backpack in the passenger seat, and left without a second thought. My head was too hot for airports, lines, and loud people. I needed silence, the road, and a chance to regroup. The plan was simple: drive up I-35 to Kansas City, then onto I-70 and head west. but it was near Great Bend that everything started to go off the rails. A multiple collision closed the main highway, and the GPS unit simply stopped working. A local driver advised me to take a shortcut, an old little-used back road, cutting through small ghost towns that still survive with rusty diners and auto repair shops that look like relics of the 1970s. That was how I arrived at what seemed to be the last inhabited spot before the complete darkness of dawn, a forgotten intersection where a sign with burned letters blinked, Sunvale Inn, Vacancy. The place had once seemed beautiful, perhaps in the 1950s, when motels were the neon-lit American dream. But now, it was a shadow of its former self, peeling paint, fogged-up windows, weeds growing between the cracks in the parking lot. Still, there was something about the setting that gave me a strange sense of déjà vu, as if I'd stopped there before, as if this place had been waiting for me. And when the rain began to fall, thin and insistent, I decided that was where I would spend the night. There was no receptionist, no cars in the area, just a handwritten note taped to the glass of the front door. Room 3, key is in the door. Pay later. I found this unusual, but not dangerous. It was late. I was tired, and the last town was over 40 miles away. I grabbed the key, let myself in, and locked the door with 2 turns. The room was simple: a double bed with a sagging mattress, a red bedspread stained with age, a dark wood dresser, thick curtains, and a digital clock beside the bed that read 2:43 a.m. It was all too quiet, the kind of silence that isn't comforting. It's unsettling. Even so, I lay down in my clothes, just trying to shut out my thoughts. My mind whirled between childhood memories with my sister, the smell of my mother's cooking, the last time we were all together, and the guilt of not being present as I should have been. But that guilt was interrupted by a sharp sound that made me jump out of bed. Ding-dong. The bell. My eyes went straight to the clock. 4:17. It was instantaneous. The sound, the chill running down my spine, the paralysis of my senses. It made no sense. I'd locked the door. No one knew I was there. And that doorbell, it seemed to have come from inside the room, not outside. I walked slowly to the door, peered through the peephole. Nothing. No figure. No shadow. And yet the sound remained vivid in my mind, as if it were part of something larger I couldn't yet grasp. I went back to bed, trying to rationalize. Maybe it was some kind of automatic motel alarm, an old system programmed to go off at fixed times. Maybe someone had passed by and rung the bell by mistake. But why 4:17? Why exactly that time? It was too specific, too strange, and most disturbing. The clock beside the bed didn't move. It remained at 4:17 for almost 5 minutes before returning to its normal countdown. The next morning, I tried to speak to someone at the front desk, but the place remained deserted. I grabbed my backpack, dropped $20 on the counter, and got ready to leave. When I got in my car and glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made me slam on the brakes. The motel sign, which had been flashing vacancy until then, now read, room taken. 3. It hadn't been lit the night before. Comment, that makes sense to me. If you've ever felt like you're exactly where you shouldn't be, but can't explain why. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. On the road, we quickly learn to distinguish between what's real and what's imagined. The squeak of wind against the bodywork, the sound of tires on loose gravel, even the nighttime sounds of the engine cooling down. Everything has its place, its time, its logic. But that night at the Sunvale Inn, something escaped any logical explanation. I tried to continue on as if nothing had happened, but the road ahead seemed increasingly silent, as if the world had taken a step back. And the further I got, the more I felt that something inside me hadn't left that room. Or worse, that something from there had come with me. I spent the morning driving through small, almost ghost towns, where the only signs of life came from gas stations smelling of old oil and cafes with more empty chairs than customers. At some point, my cell phone connection returned, and I called the hospital. My sister was still under observation with no release date set. I tried to tell them I was on my way, but the connection cut out. The signal dropped. I got back in the car, looked in the rearview mirror, and for a second I thought I saw the room. It wasn't the reflection of the backseat. It was as if the image of room 3 was there, floating in the glass. I blinked. It was gone. I tried to laugh it off, tried to rationalize. I was tired, sleep-deprived, emotionally drained. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. That night, I accidentally circled a stretch of highway and, without realizing it, ended up back in the same area. The GPS seemed to have malfunctioned. I drove around a few more times, trying to find a new spot to sleep, anywhere but that one. But as if an invisible force was guiding my decisions, I ended up back at the Sunvale Inn. I only realized it when I stopped the car and saw the sign, Vacancy, Room 3, still lit, and still waiting for me. Everything inside me screamed to turn around, but logic, damned logic, said it couldn't be a coincidence. I needed to understand, I needed to see again, to enter that room and prove to myself that it was all just a bout of exhaustion, that the doorbell, the clock, the sound were just projections of my exhaustion. This time the door was already ajar. The key wasn't in the lock. I pushed cautiously. The room was exactly as I'd left it. Same blanket, same sweet, stuffy smell in the air, as if no one had opened that window in decades. But the clock was different. It read 4:16. That froze me. It was still just after 10 o'clock. The clock already showed 4:16. Only a minute to go. As if he'd been waiting for me. As if he knew I'd be back. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to my own heartbeat. Each second felt like an eternity until it happened again. Ding-dong. At exactly 4:17. This time I didn't get up immediately. I stood still, trying to understand why that sound felt different now. It was the same knock, yes, but there was something more. A second later, I heard a faint scratching at the bottom of the door, as if nails, or something similar, were being dragged calmly against the wood. I gathered my courage, slowly got up, and walked to the door. The peephole was dark, completely black, covered, or maybe simply empty. I pressed my ear to the door, and at that exact moment, the sound stopped. I felt as if, on the other side, something was also pressed against it, breathing, trying to hear me. And before I could act, I heard a subtle sound, a faint click coming from inside the room. I turned slowly, looking at the dresser. One of the drawers had opened by itself. Inside was a small battery-powered radio, on, but with no station tuned in, just static. And amidst the crackles and hisses, there were voices, whispers, in a language I couldn't identify, but which seemed to speak directly to me, choppy phrases, as if they were part of an old program broadcast, from a place forgotten in time. I tried to turn off the radio, but it stayed tuned even without a battery. With each attempt, the voices intensified, and the clock froze again at 4:17. I stared at it, unable to understand where reality began and illusion ended. I was trapped between two worlds, the external, where everything seemed to follow its course, and the internal, where time froze, where sounds took on a life of their own, and where every second dragged my sanity closer to collapse. That morning I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair watching the door, waiting for something I couldn't even define. When sunlight finally began to filter through the heavy curtains, the radio stopped. The clock started ticking again. Silence filled the room again, but it didn't bring peace. It brought anticipation, as if all this were just the beginning. Write down, I'm on this journey too. If you've ever felt like there are places where time doesn't work as it should, and where the decisions you make seem like they were made by another version of you. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. That morning, I left my room like someone leaving a minefield behind. Each step to the car was like crossing a threshold between what I knew of the world and what that place insisted on showing me. The sun was already high, scorching the hood of the car, and for a moment, normalcy seemed to have returned. But everything in me knew it was only appearance. The silence in the air wasn't the silence of rest. It was the silence of something hiding, something waiting for the right moment to reveal itself again. I got back on the road, feeling like I needed to get out of there as quickly as possible. Miles away, my breath was still coming in short gasps, but no matter how hard I tried to focus on the road ahead, my mind couldn't shake the image of that stopped clock, the static on the radio, the feeling that something was watching me from behind the door, and most of all, that doorbell ringing. I need you to understand this. It wasn't just a sound. It was a breaking point, as if, every time it echoed, something was activated, something that shouldn't be there. Not at that time, not in this world. I spent the day trying to distract myself. I stopped at a roadside cafe, ordered 2 scrambled eggs with bacon and black coffee. The waiter, a man in a battered hat, struck up a conversation as if sensing something was bothering me. When I mentioned the motel, he paled, looked away, and simply said, "Sunvale? I thought they closed that place down over 15 years ago." I asked him what he knew, but he just shook his head, placed the check on the table, and walked slowly away. That reaction only reinforced the feeling that there was a hidden truth there, something no one wanted, or could, explain. I drove until dusk. I wanted to get somewhere with movement, light, and people, but the opposite happened. The GPS started to go around in circles. The road signs I passed seemed to repeat themselves, and when I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the Sunvale Inn sign for the third time, I realized it wasn't me who was going back. It was the place that wouldn't let me leave. I pulled over to the side of the road, got out panting, and looked around. The sky was clear, starry, with no sign of a storm, no sound of crickets or birds. It was as if nature had paused everything. And in the background, right at the back, the sign flashed, Room 3, ready. Entered the room once more. I can't even explain why. Something inside me told me that until I understood what it was, there would be no escape. The room was the same, but the air, denser, more saturated, as if I were breathing moisture trapped for decades. And when I slammed the door, I noticed immediately the doorknob had a mark, a visible, damp handprint, as if someone, or something, had pressed there for a long time, as if you'd been waiting, as if you'd never left. The clock read 4:14, couldn't ignore it anymore. It was like a cycle, and I was stuck in it. I sat in the same chair as the night before. The radio was off, but I already knew that meant nothing. Time seemed to bend, as if there were invisible shadows behind it all, layers of reality overlapping in that room. At 4:17 sharp, the doorbell rang again, but this time, it was different. Before touching, I felt, as if the vibration passed through the floor, through the wall, through my own body. The sound didn't seem to come from the door. It seemed to come from within the structure of the room, as if it were part of it, as if the place breathed. I got up slowly and touched the doorknob. It was warm. I stood there for a while, just listening, waiting for any noise outside, but there was nothing. So, instead of opening the door, I turned to the mirror above the dresser, and I saw something impossible. The reflection showed me still sitting in the chair, motionless, eyes closed, as if I were still there, as if I had never gotten up. It took my breath away. I touched my face. I blinked. I took 2 steps back, but the reflection remained motionless. The me inside the mirror didn't follow me with its gaze. It didn't mirror my movements. It just sat there, like an alternate version trapped in time. I approached slowly, trying to understand what was happening. When I touched the surface of the mirror, my hand didn't find glass. It found something cold and damp, like skin. And at that moment, the reflection turned its head towards me. Comment. That makes sense to me. If you've also felt that there are places where reality falls apart, and everything you thought you understood starts to slip through the cracks of the impossible. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. My body froze before the mirror. The reflected image, that thing that held my face, my form, my clothes, slowly turned its head toward me, as if merely waiting for my touch. It didn't blink. It expressed nothing. It was like an empty mold, a presence clothed within me. I recoiled, stumbling over the edge of the chair, and my heart raced as if trying to alert me that this wasn't just a vision, not just a reflection altered by fatigue or madness. It was real as the ground beneath my feet. At that moment, I couldn't distinguish what was part of my perception and what was part of the place. The clock kept showing 4:17. Time insisted on doubling, and my mind was beginning to blur the line between memory and delirium. But one thing became clear. I could no longer trust my senses. Everything there was being manipulated, distorted, extended, as if I'd stepped into a backstage of time, where reality was just a thin curtain, and behind it, something was watching me. My first reaction was to run to the room phone. I needed some anchor to the real world. I picked up the receiver with trembling hands, turned the dial, and all I heard was a hollow noise, as if there were only empty space. On the other end, I pressed the reception buttons. Nothing. Absolute silence. It was like screaming in a dream and not hearing your own voice. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Not a trace. Not a bar. No connection. No internet. No GPS. I tried restarting it. I tried activating airplane mode. I tried holding the button until it froze. Nothing worked. The screen flickered as if it were loading something that never arrived, and then returned to the home screen. My phone had become a useless piece of plastic. That was confirmation that I was isolated, not just physically but energetically, as if I'd entered a time bubble, created solely to keep me there. Then I thought of trying the reception phone, on the other side of the structure. I grabbed my keys and ran down the hallway, each footstep echoing loudly as if I were the only living sound in the place. The hallway seemed longer, darker. The lights that flickered during the day were now off, and the doors seemed closer together, as if the rooms were being squeezed together. I reached the reception desk, chest heaving, turned the unlocked doorknob and walked in. The room was as it had been before, but with a different smell. A thick, ancient odor, like musty books and wet fabric. The black rotary phone sat on the counter. I picked up the receiver and dialed 911. I waited. I listened to the rings. 1, 2, 3, 4, until the ringing stopped, and someone answered, but he didn't say anything. "Hello?" I asked, my voice weak as if I had forgotten how to speak. On the other side, a sound of slow, deep breathing like someone sleeping or pretending to sleep. "I'm stuck here. I need help," I continued, trying to remain calm. Nothing, just breathing. And then, a hoarse, drawn-out voice whispered, "You've been here before." I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. The device fell to the floor, spinning like a top until it came to a stop with the disc facing me. I stumbled out of the reception area and looked around. The parking lot was still empty, but it felt different. The shadows seemed more vivid, denser, as if the air were being shaped by something invisible, something that now knew me by name. I returned to the room, trying to understand what it all was about, and it was there that I noticed the most disturbing detail. As I turned the doorknob to room 3, I noticed it wasn't the same one I'd used before. That doorknob was slightly bent. There was a long scratch in the metal, as if a fingernail had been dragged hard against it. And worse, there was a pressure mark below the lock, as if someone or something had been leaning against it, watching. I locked the door behind me. I closed the curtains. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, feeling every beat of my heart hammering inside. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just being watched. I was being tested. The isolation wasn't accidental. It was part of the process, as if this place needed to empty me of everything before it could show me something. And the strangest thing was that I started hearing knocks, not from outside, from the ceiling, from the floor, from the walls, spaced knocks, like a code, as if something was communicating through the structures, a sort of pattern. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, 3 more, over and over again. I grabbed a pen and notebook from the drawer and started writing, trying to identify a pattern. When I finished the 3rd line, I realized it spelled out the word, "come." I didn't want to believe it, but the sequence was clear, and worse. After each tick, the clock went back a few seconds. Instead of moving forward, it was going backward, as if time hadn't just stopped, but was being reversed. It was a cycle, and I was in the middle of it. Every attempt to escape brought me back. Every decision I made only pulled me deeper. It wasn't just the room, it was the entire motel. It was the route, it was the journey, and maybe it was me. Comment below. That makes sense to me. If you've ever had the feeling of being trapped in a place that seemed to know you better than you knew yourself. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Room 3 was no longer just a physical space. By now it had become a living organism, pulsing around me, transforming in subtle and perverse ways. It was as if every wall had eyes, as if every noise carried intention. Everything seemed meticulously orchestrated to unsettle me, to pull me deeper into a spiral where reality and hallucination switched places without warning. And the most disturbing thing was that I was beginning to adapt. I could feel it when the air changed, when the temperature dropped for no reason, when the silence weighed on my shoulders even without wind, without a sound from outside, without any sign that a world existed beyond those walls. The first few times were whispers, nothing more than words swallowed by an internal wind, brief, almost childish phrases. "You're back." This time, "Look, it's behind you." I pretended not to hear. Pretending was the only resource I had left to maintain my sanity. But little by little, those voices began to recognize me. One night, the whisper didn't just speak to me, it called my name. "Ethan," so softly it seemed to come from inside my own skull. And when I turned, there was nothing. No shadow, no echo, but the sound still vibrated in the room, as if it hadn't stopped, as if the walls continued to murmur even in silence. The sensation was that I was being summoned, slowly shaped by something that knew me better than I knew myself. One morning, as I tossed and turned in bed, trying to ignore the clock's inverted ticking, the doorbell rang again. But this time, it didn't come from the door. The sound came from inside the room, clear, sharp, as if it were inside the pillow, inside my chest, echoing in every inch of the space. I sat up instantly, terrified, and saw the curtain swaying slightly, even though the window was locked. A sweet scent filled the air. It wasn't perfume, it wasn't dust. It was an aroma indescribable, something between dried flowers and sun-baked flesh. And then, the voice came, but it wasn't the same as before. It was more serious, masculine, familiar. You already know what you have to do. Those words stuck to my skin like a cold sweat that wouldn't dry. I didn't know exactly what they meant, but something inside me understood, as if a forgotten part of me had already been through this, as if it were a repetition of an old cycle, reactivated by some mistake I hadn't yet made, or perhaps I had already made and forgotten. The next day, I found something new on my bed, an old black and white photograph, folded in half. In it, a woman and a small boy stood in front of what appeared to be the original facade of the Sunvale Inn, but that wasn't what gave me chills. It was the fact that the boy looked exactly like me, not similar, identical. Even though the image was from at least 40 years, there was no denying it. It was my face, my expression, my scar above my eyebrow. It was like finding a portrait of yourself in a life you never lived, or maybe forgot to live. I ran to the mirror, took a deep breath, and stared at my reflection. It stared back, but with a slight delay, as if trying to keep up with me. I tried quick movements, blinking, smiling, turning my neck. The reflection responded with a slight delay, milliseconds, but noticeable. And then, something broke the pattern. I closed my eyes. The reflection didn't. A wave of silent panic gripped me, but my body wasn't reacting as it had before. It was as if I were becoming increasingly accustomed to the impossible, as if logic had ceased to be my primary compass. I took a deep breath, trying to regroup my thoughts. I returned to my chair, stared at the clock, frozen at 4:17, and it was then that I heard footsteps, coming from the bathroom. There shouldn't be anyone there. I stood up slowly, crossed the room, with a dry throat, and pushed open the door with my fingertips. The light was off. Nothing. But the bathroom mirror was fogged up, as if someone had just stepped out of the shower, and there were words written there, traced with a finger in the steam. Try again. I locked the bathroom door, leaned against the wall, and closed my eyes. I needed to understand. I needed to organize the elements of this distorted equation, the frozen time, the altered reflections, the objects that appeared and disappeared, the voices with unrevealed intentions. Nothing was random. It was like a puzzle that required more than reasoning. It required surrender, transformation, as if the place would only fully reveal itself the moment I accepted its existence as part of me. The idea of having a distorted spiritual experience crossed my mind, as if it were some kind of purgatory hidden beneath the facade of a cheap Kansas motel, a blind spot on the map where souls meet their alternate selves, or perhaps where they face the truths they never wanted to face. Comment: I'm on this journey too. If you feel that sometimes reality gives small signs that there is something more, something that doesn't appear on maps, nor in mirrors, but that still watches you. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. The next morning, if it could even be called morning, the room seemed shrouded in a fine mist, as if the dawn had never ended. The light that filtered through the cracks in the curtains was gray, directionless, as if the sky outside had forgotten how to dawn. I rose with a heavy body and a mind torn between the urge to flee and the need to understand. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was fascination. A dark, yet powerful fascination. The curiosity of someone beginning to suspect they're trapped inside something much larger than they imagined. A cycle, perhaps. An experiment. A space where time doesn't obey, and truth reveals itself through the cracks of what we can't name. I put on my jacket, grabbed my room key, and stepped cautiously out into the hallway. The floor creaked as if suspended in a void, and each door I passed seemed to watch me with a specific kind of silence, a silence that changes in intensity as you approach. I tried each one. Locked. Room 1, room 2, room 4. Curiously, room 3, mine, was the only one with a worn lock, as if dozens of hands had been forcing that latch for years. But then, As I reached the door to room 6, I felt something different. A chill, creeping up my bones and a slight shift of air, as if someone had just entered and left the door ajar without locking it. The doorknob was cool to the touch. I turned it carefully, and the door gave. The room was darker than the others. The window was boarded up as if someone had tried to block the light from entering, but that wasn't what paralyzed me for a few seconds. It was the smell, a mix of mold, iron, and something overly sweet. The kind of smell the body recognizes as a warning, signal, even without knowing why. I turned on the light. It flickered and flickered before stabilizing, and what I saw inside was like opening a safe full of other people's memories. Old suitcases stacked in corners, partially faded name tags, clothes strewn across the bed, children's shoes on the floor, a used toothbrush still in the bathroom cup. On the bedside table, a set of clocks, all different from different eras, but all stopped at the same time, 4:17. I approached one of the watches. It was a gold pocket watch with a cracked glass. The inscription on the back read, "For Henry, come back when it's time." The phrase gave me chills. Come back? When? To where? Who was Henry? And why were all those watches stopped at the same minute, the same second? I continued exploring. In the closet, I found an old camera, the kind that uses film. When I opened it, I realized there was still a roll of film inside, and beside it, a stack of unsent letters, written in shaky handwriting, some smudged by water drops or too much time in the humidity. The first letter began, "If anyone finds this, know that time isn't linear here, and that some of us are still trying to get out." I can't explain what I felt when I read that. It wasn't surprise. It was confirmation. Someone before me had already realized. Someone had already tried to warn those who came after. Perhaps that was the purpose of that room, to contain the memories of those who realized too soon, or too late. One of the walls was partially peeling. Behind the old wallpaper were marks made with a pocket knife. Scratches, dates, symbols, lines cutting through the days like a countdown to time, or attempts. And among the scratches, a word that kept repeating, "Start over." It was as if the room were a disposal point, a space where time collapsed and left its traces before beginning all over again, as if each guest who entered was captured by some kind of emotional cycle, a narrative loop, as if the motel were an organism that thrived on the attempt, on the insistence on understanding. I approached the bed. There were body marks on the mattress as if someone still slept there, and on the pillow, a strand of blonde hair, long, fresh. It was impossible. It couldn't be there, unless someone had been occupying the room until recently. I went to the bathroom. The door was ajar. The mirror was covered with a towel. I yanked the towel away, and the image I saw nearly knocked me over. It wasn't my face. It was another. An older man, pale with sunken eyes and a weary expression. He looked at me with regret, not with fear, with familiarity, as if he knew me, as if he were trying to warn me or accept me. I blinked, and the image returned to normal. It was me, and it wasn't. There was something different in the look, darker, emptier, as if each day in that place drained away pieces of my identity, replacing me with some version the motel itself was shaping. The journey was no longer just about getting out. It was about not forgetting who I was before I entered. Comment below. This makes sense to me. If you've also felt that there are places or moments in which time and logic bend, and everything you believed in begins to rearrange itself, as if something were silently directing the script of your life. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. The realization finally sank in when I tried to leave the motel what should have been the next morning. The sun hadn't yet fully broken the sky, but it was, clear enough for me to see the road ahead. I hurriedly gathered my things, locking the door behind me as if that would stop whatever was keeping me there. I started the car, put the key in the ignition, and screeched out of the parking lot like someone escaping an open prison. I passed the worn Sunvale Inn sign, staring straight ahead with one intention in mind: to leave and never look back. I drove for over 40 minutes in a straight line. The scenery was repetitive, but not unusual for that. Part of Kansas. Open fields, solitary trees, the occasional distant barn, until something bothered me. The curve, that wide left turn, with a barbed wire fence on the right. I'd driven past it before. The yellow sign with the silhouette of a deer, the dry brush growing in a pattern I seemed to memorize. It was the same place, but I hadn't made a U-turn. My heart began to pound. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as if it might slip from my hands. Another 10 minutes, and then the final confirmation. The sign. The damn sign. Sunvale Inn. Vacancy. Exactly as I'd left it. The same blinking streetlight. The same trash blowing across the empty parking lot. And the same room, with the door slightly open. I got out of the car in shock. There was no logic. No curves. No returns. No navigation errors. It was as if the road had twisted. As if I'd driven in a straight line to the same place. Only it wasn't exactly the same. There were small differences. The board on the reception porch was broken. The lamppost now had a small bottle hanging from it. Tiny details, but different enough for me to know this wasn't just any ordinary déjà vu. It was a repetition, but a repetition with variations. I returned to room 3 like someone returning to the scene of an accident. Nothing had changed, except the radio, which was now on, and the sound coming from it was my own voice. A recording from the night before. I was narrating everything I'd seen in room 6, describing the mirror, the clocks, the name Henry, even the phrase on the steam, "Try again." The recording went up to the point where the mirror reflected a face that wasn't mine, and then silence. I grabbed my phone, still without signal, but this time, I decided to use the camera. I started recording everything. The radio, the mirror, the clock stuck at 4:17. I made sure to show my face, my voice, my movements. I told the time out loud, described what I was doing, where I was. It was the only way to have some kind of reference. If everything happened again, at least I'd have something to compare it to. But the file disappeared. It disappeared the moment I tried to watch it. The video folder simply froze. When I forced a restart, the phone reverted to its original factory state, as if it had been reset. No data, no records, no memory. The only photo left was a corrupted image, a dark blur with 2 white dots in the center. I stared at it for a few minutes, trying to identify what it was. And the longer I stared, the more it looked like a pair of eyes, round, symmetrical, staring directly at me. No face, no context, just presence. From that moment on, everything started to repeat. The sequence of events, the knocking on the ceiling, the radio turning on by itself, the voice saying, "You're back," the reflex that delayed, and of course the clock, always him, stopped at 4:17. I began to take notes, to organize the repetitions. Each night I marked the small changes, trying to piece together a pattern. Some nights the radio would say, "See," other nights, "Listen." Sometimes a new object would appear in the room, a matchbox bearing the name of a bar that no longer exists, a lighter inscribed, "Tampa, 1982, a letter written in French, fragments, as if time were dropping pieces from other stories into this narrative, waiting for me to put the puzzle together correctly. During one of the repeats, I found a notebook under the bed. It seemed to belong to another guest, pages filled with scribbles, crossword puzzles, dates and times, the same obsession that now consumed me. One page was marked with a red ribbon. It read, "If you are reading this, you are past the point of no return. Don't try to leave, try to understand." And that's when I understood. It wasn't about escape. It was about understanding, about a change of mindset. The motel wasn't a physical prison. It was an internal mirror, a distorted reflection of my own consciousness. With each return, I confronted a new version of myself, a cycle of forced transformation, a journey of revelations that required not only courage, but total surrender to what seemed impossible. I tried everything, changing routines, ignoring the signs, taking different paths within the motel, but it was like rolling a loaded dice. It always landed on the same number, the same room, the same clock, and always, at the center of it all, that sound, ding-dong. The last night I could record any coherent memories, I sat up in bed and started talking to myself. Not out of desperation, but out of strategy. I wanted to mentally record my own voice. I set a phrase as an anchor, repeating it quietly until I fell asleep. "My name is Ethan Coleman. I am real. This place is no bigger than my memory." When I woke up, the phrase was written on the wall in chalk, but I didn't remember doing that. Comment: I'm on this journey too. If you've ever felt trapped in cycles that repeat themselves, as if life were trying to teach you something you haven't yet been able to decipher. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. The first time I tried to open the door to room 6, It seemed locked like everyone else's, but there was something different about it. The doorknob was an older model, rusty, almost handmade, with carved designs around it, symbols I didn't recognize but that stirred something in me, as if I'd seen them somewhere before. And unlike the other rooms, the door frame had a newer feel, as if someone had purposely replaced or reinforced it. The entire hallway seemed to avoid that spot. Even the carpet wore less there, as if footsteps had learned to ignore it. That night I woke up to the sound of the doorbell, as usual, but not in room 3. I was in room 6. No transition, no memory of having changed. It was just there. The bed was higher. The smell in the air was of something too old to name. The light came from a small lamp in the corner, dim, amber, flickering as if it were about to go out. I got up slowly with a mixture of fear and estrangement and began to explore. The layout of the room was the same, but the contents were not. This space was a kind of archive, a repository of everything the motel seemed to want to hide or preserve. Dozens of VHS tapes were scattered on the floor, some stacked haphazardly, others tossed as if discarded in a hurry. Many had hand-scrawled labels: Turner, 1994, Ellis, second try, Susan, failed. My fingers trembled as I inserted the first tape into an old cassette player connected to a small tube TV in the corner of the room. The picture was shaky, full of noise, but I could hear a man's voice, American, with a southern accent. He was clearly distraught. There are 3 nights, always 3. The first is the warning. The second is the preparation. The third is the invitation. When the doorbell rings at 4:17, no matter what you hear, do not open the door. The tape cut into sections and then rewound. At the end, he said, something more quietly, almost as if he were being watched while recording, "If you're watching this, maybe you still have time. Maybe." The tape got stuck. It ejected on its own. I tried another. A woman this time, sunken eyes, smudged makeup, sitting in the exact same chair I was in at that moment. She was looking straight at the camera, holding a photo. It was her younger self, next to a man. She whispered. He opened the door. He saw what he shouldn't have. And now he doesn't speak anymore. He just repeats, like an echo, like part of the motel. She turns her head slowly as if she heard something behind the camera. The recording ends there, abruptly. I continued watching tape after tape. The voices varied, the faces changed, but the content repeated itself with terrifying frequency. The same dates, the same patterns, the same times. Everyone talked about the clock, the mirror, the voice, the sound of the doorbell, and everyone, at some point, warned of the same thing. Don't open the door at 4:17. But what would happen if someone opened it? Only one of the tapes attempted to be shown, a recording with no sound. The image showed the door being slowly opened by a tall man in a white shirt, his hands trembling. When the door opens fully, the image distorts as if the tape were deliberately damaged. And then, he disappears. He doesn't run. He doesn't scream. He simply vanishes from the frame. The camera continues recording the empty room for several minutes, until the image fades. There were dozens of similar recordings, some left as warnings, others as a confession, but the most disturbing was the last video I found. The tape was inside a box with my name on it, handwritten, Ethan, no last name, no date. My heart raced. I didn't want to watch it, but I knew I had to. I put the tape in the player, took a deep breath, and pressed play. The screen started out dark, muffled sounds. Then, the image. It was me, recorded from an angle I'd never used. Before, from a spot on the ceiling, asleep, in bed in room 3. I saw myself roll over, startle awake, exactly as I remembered from the night before. I saw myself walk to the door, hesitate for a few seconds and open it, only I didn't remember doing it. I'd never opened the door, at least not consciously, but the recording showed it clearly. I'd open it, I'd look down the hallway, and then I'd smile, an empty smile, a smile that wasn't mine. Then the recording froze, blue screen, loud noises. The TV turned off by itself. The tape ejected. I stood there still trying to absorb it. The revelation wasn't just about what happened when you opened the door. It was about who you became after you did. Something about the motel, something about that cycle, that loop of time and decisions, seemed to recreate people, as if room 3 were the entrance, and room 6, the archive, the collection point, a place where time ceased to be linear and began to record different versions of the same story, versions that accumulated until the guest completely lost themselves. I stood up, dizzy. The lamp began to flicker more intensely. The radio turned on, but there was no sound, only the low creak of breathing, a sound I recognized. It was the same one from the tapes, the same one from inside the wall, the same one from me. Comment: that makes sense to me. If you've ever had the feeling that there are places that aren't just physical spaces, but guardians of unmade choices. The decision didn't come consciously. I didn't stand up and say, "It's today." There was no courage, no desperation, just a strange acceptance, as if something inside me had silenced all questions and left room only for an inevitable gesture. I knew the doorbell would ring. I knew the clock would freeze at 4:17. I knew the breathing on the other side of the door would synchronize with mine, as it had for nights. But this time, something was different. The air seemed denser, as if time itself had held its breath, waiting for my next move. It was raining, not outside, inside. It was hard to explain, but the bedroom ceiling dripped even though there was no leak. Each drop fell as if it were timed, rhythmic, choreographed. In the mirror, my image wasn't reflected, just a blur, a shadow that moved with a slight delay and stopped in positions I couldn't reproduce. The radio whispered names. Some I recognized, others I didn't, but they all seemed part of something I had forgotten or chosen to forget. I sat on the edge of the bed, calm, as if awaiting a verdict. The clock stopped. The doorbell rang. And then I got up. I didn't hesitate. I didn't put my eye to the peephole. I didn't take a deep breath. I just reached for the doorknob, turned it, and pulled the door open. What was outside wasn't exactly a person. It was a presence. And that presence had my face. It wasn't like the recordings. It wasn't a reflection, nor an exact copy. It was as if someone had used my appearance as a reference, but left out the essence. His hair was disheveled in a way I would never wear. His eyes were sunken and dry, and there was something dull about his skin, as if made of aged wax. And most disturbingly, he didn't blink. We stood face to face for a few seconds. The hallway was completely dark except for the amber light coming from my own room. The creature, or whatever it was, didn't move. It just stared at me with a kind of ancient patience, as if it knew it had already won. And at that moment, something even stranger happened. The clock started ticking again, but not forward. It began to rewind, minute by minute, second by second. And with each backward leap, a part of the room began to change. The bedspread disappeared. The paint peeled. The curtains looked new again. The furniture shifted. It was like watching time itself rewind in slow motion. And I, standing in the doorway, feeling my body vibrate at a frequency that wasn't mine, was struck by an absurd thought. What if this wasn't the first date? What if everything I was experiencing was just a repetition of a moment that had already happened, and that I had already chosen to forget? The entity in front of me took a step toward the room. I didn't react. There was no fear anymore, just a kind of deep weariness. She didn't enter. She just reached out for mine, and when our fingers touched, I felt it. It wasn't pain. It wasn't cold. It was memory. An avalanche of memories that didn't belong to me, but were mine. I saw images of people I'd never met, places I'd never been, decisions I'd never made. It was as if that thing had stored alternate versions of me, versions that failed, that gave in, that gave up, each of them living within some 417 cycle. And I was just one more. I stepped back and slammed the door shut. I locked it. I leaned my back against the wood and closed my eyes. Outside, silence. The radio cut out. The light blinked once and stabilized. And then, something changed. The clock kept going back. Only, now it showed 4:16, 4:15, 4:14. And with each step back in time, the details around me returned even more. The TV disappeared. The radio vanished. The mirror cracked on its own. The mattress sagged, reverting to a previous version. Even my own body began to feel it. My clothes grew looser. My beard disappeared. The cut on my finger I'd made 3 days earlier disappeared. It was like I was being pulled back by an invisible reel, a timeline that refused to let me move forward, as if the motel, or whatever it really was, had included me in its mechanism. And now I was part of it. The ground shook, slightly but enough to knock me off balance. On the wall, where there had been floral wallpaper, carved words appeared. They formed themselves, as if someone on the other side were writing with an invisible knife. "You understood?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. And then, everything froze. Not like the other times. This time, it was absolute, as if even sound had stopped vibrating. In the air, I looked around. Nothing moved. Not the wind, not the dust, not even my own reflection, which now looked more like a photograph than a projection. I stood still too, waiting, listening, and it came. Not the sound of the doorbell, not breathing, but a deep whisper, directly in my ear, without a mouth, without air, just presence. "You know what you need to do." Comment below. This makes sense to me. If you've ever felt that there are moments when life stops, not to rest, but to show you that certain doors once opened can never be closed again. I don't know how much time has passed since that last whispered phrase. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Maybe there's no longer any time in the sense I knew it. The sensation was of floating in a suspended instant, where everything around me existed and didn't exist at the same time, as if the world were waiting for a decision, but not mine, as if it had already been made. When the clock started moving again, still going backward, I realized I had to get out of there, not for survival, not for logic, but for instinct. Something inside me screamed that if I stayed another night in that room at that frequency, in that pattern, I wouldn't come out the same way I'd come in, and maybe I wouldn't even come out. I grabbed my backpack, the same one I'd had when I arrived, only now it felt heavier, as if it carried more than just clothes and belongings, as if it absorbed the remnants of my previous selves, of days restarted, of decisions aborted, of dawns interrupted at 4:17 a.m. I opened the door to room 3 and threw myself out without looking back. The parking lot was covered in a thick, milky fog, thick as wet cotton, the kind of fog that doesn't move with the wind. It floats, shapes itself, observes. My footsteps echoed muffled on the cracked asphalt. I walked to the car, and for the first time it felt strange, like a car that belonged to someone who wasn't me anymore. I got in and turned on the ignition. It worked right away. The radio came on with a soft click and played an old song I didn't recognize, but which made me cry for no reason. The road was ahead, open, empty. I drove straight ahead, trusting momentum. No GPS, no map, no plan. But after 20 minutes of driving along what seemed like an endless road, I saw the familiar reflection of the blinking lights on the sign. The world seemed to shrink. The fog followed me like a gentle animal, not threatening, but watchful. I slowed down with trembling hands. There it was again, Sunvale Inn, but with a subtle difference. Now the sign read, "Welcome back, Ethan." I stepped on the accelerator, hard. I drove straight through, ignoring the turnoff, determined to break the cycle, to tear apart the logic that tried to keep me on that fixed path. The road curved slightly to the left and then climbed. I kept my foot on the pedal. The engine roared, as if it understood my urgency. But what was at the top of the hill? The motel. Again, only now. The sky was different, static, cloudless, starless, toneless, like an old canvas painted with a gray brush. And the dashboard clock stopped too, reading 4:17, always 4:17. I got out of the car and ran. I don't know exactly where. I just ran, crossing the road, entering the woods, trying to follow any route that didn't lead back. But each step led me to the same center. Round and round later, I stumbled to my knees in front of the reception desk. The sign was still lit. The world around me seemed to chuckle softly. I got up, my face covered in dust. My knees were bleeding, but it didn't hurt anymore. Nothing hurt anymore. The only thing that pierced me was the silence of remembering myself, because there, kneeling on the gravel floor, I realized something that completely consumed me. I no longer remembered the reason for my trip. I didn't remember where I was going, or why I had left home, or even if anyone was waiting for me. My sister's name, I've forgotten. The color of my car, gone. My own face, floated only as an idea. The motel didn't just trap, it erased. Little by little, delicately, it rewrote. Each loop cost me a memory. Each decision left me with less of an identity. And now, I no longer knew if I was trying to escape or simply complete the process of becoming part of my surroundings. The motel wasn't a place. It was a ritual, an emotional machine that sculpted visitors into characters in a plot that repeated itself endlessly, with variations, with failures, with attempts but always ending at the same point. 4:17, the doorbell, the choice, the repetition. I sat on the sidewalk in front of room 3. The key was stuck in the door. The hallway light was on. A figure was moving inside the room, even though no one had entered. Maybe I was already inside, or maybe I had never left. What is an escape after all, when you no longer know where you came from? Comment. I'm on this journey too. If you've ever experienced moments when you felt like you were moving away from yourself, and the more you tried to go back, the less you knew where the beginning was. I don't know how much time I had left, or if time even had meaning in that place, but there was a different urgency that night, an inner pull, almost like a remnant of who I'd been, telling me that if I didn't leave something recorded now, everything I'd experienced would be swallowed up with me, and the cycle would just continue, with the next face, the next name, the next version of myself, entering that room like someone passing through a curtain with an invisible price tag. I dragged the old camera onto the dresser and positioned it in front of me. The lens was slightly dusty, as if I knew I'd never get another chance to capture anything real. The screen flickered on hesitantly, and there was my reflection, a little paler, eyes sunken, hair disheveled, but it was still me, or something close to me. I pressed the rec button. My voice was weak at first, but gradually it gained strength. It was more than a confession. It was a kind of testament, something that needed to exist even if no one ever saw it. If you find this, listen carefully, and listen until the end. The clock ticked to 4:15 when I started. I wasn't going to race against it. This time I was going to talk to time, looking it in the eye. My name is Ethan Coleman, and I don't know exactly how long I've been here. I don't know if today is the same day I arrived, if yesterday really happened, or if this has all been replayed 100 times and I'm just remembering it now. But I know one thing for sure, this place is real, and it's not a motel. I swallowed hard. The name on the sign says Sunvale Inn, exit 47 off US 56 Kansas, but what you have here is something else. It's a space suspended between everything you think you understand about cause and effect. Here, every choice costs you pieces of your identity, and room 3 is the gateway. I sighed. The camera shook slightly, as if capturing not only the image but the energy of the moment. They won't force you into anything. That's the cruelest part. You'll enter of your own free will. You'll accept the key because you're tired, because it's dark, because it feels safe. They're counting on this, on the fact that the most important decisions are made in the most trivial moments. The doorbell rang, as always, like a signal that it was time. I glanced at the door unhurriedly, and then back at the camera. If the doorbell rings at 4:17, don't open it, even if it's your voice calling, even if it's the person you love most, even if everything inside you tells you to see what's on the other side. Don't open it, because what you'll see there will look like you, but it won't be you. The image of the mirror came to mind, the reflection smiling to itself. Room 6, the tapes, the voices, the entity. If for some reason you're already inside, and you're seeing this, it means there might still be time, that maybe you were chosen to remember. And if that's the case, leave something behind, a sign, a warning, even if you think no one will hear it, because the worst part of all this isn't being trapped. I tilted my head, feeling my eyes sting. It's forgetting that one day you tried to leave. The clock froze, 4:17, but for the first time I didn't get up. I didn't run to the door. I didn't stare at the peephole. I just stood there, staring into the lens, breathing steadily, as if accepting my own story without further resistance. The sound of the doorbell came, of course, but this time it didn't feel like a summons. It felt like a ritual fulfilled, as if the cycle had been waiting for this recording for years, or lifetimes. I pressed my face closer to the camera. If you get this far, and find this video, don't accept room 3, no matter how cheap it seems. The light flickered. The camera turned off by itself. The sound stopped, and the room fell silent, as if it were listening. Comment. This makes sense to me. If you've ever felt that there are messages that aren't meant for everyone, just for those who still remember that they're trying to wake up. The camera clicked off. No transition, no closing screen, just a moment of sudden darkness, as if everything that had been said had vanished into thin air along with the last recorded image. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, as if the very space of the room held its breath, awaiting the next act. I stood there, motionless, my eyes still fixed on the lens that now reflected only the light of the flickering lamp above me. Everything in me knew that this recording wasn't an end. It was a seed, something that needed to be left in time, planted with intention, like a trail for those yet to come. Because deep down, it wasn't just about escape. It was about breaking the pattern, breaking the programming, creating noise where before there had been only repetition. And then, it rang again. Ding-dong. The doorbell. Punctual. Precise. 4:17. The sound didn't seem to come from the door. Not this time. It was as if it had been triggered inside me, as if that sound was imprinted on some hidden frequency in my body, activating whenever I reached this point in the story. I didn't react. I didn't close my eyes, I didn't get up, I just let the sound pass through me like someone watching their own shadow move on its own. But there was something new in that moment, a subtle difference in the air, in the weight of the room. For the first time I felt no fear, no fatigue, no urgency. I felt clarity. It was as if, after everything, the loops, the broken reflections, the paths that always led back, the recordings, the encounters with the thing that mimicked my face, I had finally understood. The Sunvale Inn wasn't a place to escape. It was a place to remember. Remember what happens when you live on autopilot. Remember the price of repeating the same patterns, expecting different results. Remember that there are times when the smallest decisions, like accepting a key, ignoring a hunch, walking through a door at 4:17 a.m., become portals to realities you weren't prepared to understand. And more than that, remember that there are spaces where time does not flow. It observes. I stood up slowly, the floor feeling like it was new. I walked to the mirror, and this time my reflection reacted as it should. No delay, no strange expression. It was me, whole, present, awake. For a brief second, I felt anchored back to reality, as if by leaving that recording I had drawn an invisible line between who I was and who I had become. But the doorbell rang once more, and with it, something hit me inside. I understood that, even remembering, I was still there. That memory wasn't an escape, but a tool, a way to open doors that don't require a key. They require awareness. And when you begin to see behind the scenes of your own journey, the motel no longer needs to keep you trapped. You become part of the machine, but with a new role, not as a guest, as a warning. Comment below. This message was for me. If you feel that some experiences are more than coincidence, they are silent wake-up calls before the next doorbell rings. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story pulled you in. Maybe it was the silence of the room, maybe the sound of the doorbell, or maybe the feeling that there are places where time doesn't pass by idly. The truth is, not everything needs to be explained, but some things need to be felt. And if you've felt it, then you're already part of it. Leave a comment with the phrase, "I'm with you until the end," just so I know you've been through this entire journey with me. These signs show me that I'm not speaking to a void, that there are people on the other side, truly listening. If this kind of story provokes you, captivates you, or makes you think differently about what lies beyond the ordinary, subscribe to the channel. Not to follow trends, but to continue accessing stories that poke where logic can't reach. Oh, and leave a like too. Not because of an algorithm, but because of connection. It's what keeps this cycle open, so new stories keep reaching you. And if you want to go even deeper, the next video is already waiting for you. There are other corridors, other doors, and other truths hidden in the darkness. See you there.